You hear that till you came in the room. I'm just saying.
That was a nice event,
It
wasn't it?
was. I had another event to go to. I would have another glass of wine. You know? Did I say that out loud?
It's on the record.
Yeah. So I'm figuring how long I can ride the scooter before it's like, it's just cold out here. My lips getting chapped. But right now, it's not too bad.
So when are you going to decide it's getting to be winter?
Well, with global warming, I might be able to do it to, to January, But it's not too bad.
So it is 4 o'clock, and we have 4 members here, plus one appearing by video. The city manager is here. Mr. Rogers, and I see Ms. Hamill is also by video, so I think that's all of the necessary parties.
So you want to, well, Mr. Mayor, we had talked about getting the council involved earlier in the budget process.
We've got
I'll tell you what, we got to call ourselves to order and go through the
He's ready.
niceties first.
He's ready to
You're
go.
ready to go, though, hey. Okay, so the October 17th, 2022 Charlottesville City Council meeting will come to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Pinkston,
Here.
Mayor Snook,
Here?
Vice Mayor Wade.
Here.
Councilor McGill sent a notice to the mayor and clerk today requesting to participate virtually due to a medical condition that prevents her from attending in person. She will be participating from her home in Charlottesville. Is there a motion to approve Councilor McGill's remote participation?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Welcome, Councilor McGill. Okay, is there a motion to approve or to amend the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So this meeting, as always, will be divided into 3 main sections. The first is a work session to hear and to discuss presentations that do not require a council vote. Then we'll have a closed meeting, usually around 5:30. Then the city council business meeting, which will begin around 6:30, with the seating available in council chambers for up to 23 pre-registered attendees and media, and others will be available. Others will be able to join electronically by Zoom. So, first item on the agenda is to discuss the city budget development for FY 2024, and we have Mr. Rogers and Ms. Hamill.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council, we talked last year during the budget process as we concluded about getting council involved in the process earlier, excuse me. We paid attention to that in the schedule this year. This is the first effort for us to lay out for you what the budget process will be, and to discuss some of the challenges that and opportunities we will have in '24. And I've asked Ms. Hamill to make that presentation for us. Chrissy?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen. So it feels like just a few short months ago, we were voting to wrap up the budget, and here we are getting started again for the 24 budget season. So a couple things we wanted to talk about this afternoon. One is engagement on the budget, both with council and the public. Also want to recap a few of the previous allocations that we have either made during the 23 budget cycle already, and also some of the year-end surplus allocations that we talked about at the end of the 23 budget development process. And then to give you a little bit of insights for some things to consider with the 24 budget. So a couple of key dates. We start a lot of our work sessions with this. February 15th will be the date that the real estate tax ad gets sent to the paper. So if we want to talk about changes in any of the real estate tax rates, we need to do that, and we'll talk about that before February 15th. They have to be advertised, and there has to be a public hearing, as you know. March 6th will be the date that the city manager will present the proposed operating and capital budget to city council, as well as the school board will present its budget to you on that date. March 20th will be the first public hearing on the budget and the tax rate. And April 3rd will be the second public hearing. And then on April 11th, we will officially adopt a budget. Throughout the month of March, we currently have 4 work sessions scheduled. They are March 9th, 16th, 30th, and April 6th. There's also a public meeting calendar on the budget webpage, which is linked to this PowerPoint, which I will also put on the budget webpage after we meet today. And we have penciled in a council community budget forum. There were 2 dates being discussed, but I don't think we've narrowed down a final date for those. That one was Wednesday, March 22nd, or Thursday, March 23rd. So we do need to hear from council on those if there's a preference on the date, so we can firm that up. I don't know if you all want to talk about that now or keep going, or.
We're here, let's talk about it.
Okay.
I have a slight preference for a Thursday over a Wednesday, simply because Wednesdays I've got choir practice, but that's a slight preference.
I'm fine with either of those dates.
Yeah, I'm inclined for Thursday because Wednesday is C4K day for me. So
Thursday works for me.
How about Ms. McGill?
Currently, I don't see any conflict on either date. Regretfully, I have conflicts coming up in April, but
Okay. So April 23rd, pardon, March 23rd on Thursday would seem to work for all of us. Can we coalesce on that?
Yep.
Okay.
And just one note, as we're coming out of COVID, we do currently have those scheduled to be in city space. So those work sessions will take place there this year.
Okay.
New this year, at the request of Mr. Rogers, we are going to provide the community with an opportunity to discuss budget matters with the city manager. This will be in advance of him presenting a proposed budget to council, and this will be held on Tuesday, January 10th at Carver at 6 o'clock.
And you're going to have that without any input from us, because we should be at a planning commission meeting at that time.
Community meeting.
That's right.
Not council.
That's right. Just want to let everybody know up front. Okay.
Also want to remind everyone that we do have the Budget Explorer tool online. It compares the 22 adopted budget to the 23 adopted budget. You can drill down to every department within the city, down to the line item of their budgets. This is also where you will find the quarterly reports that will be updated. So please do visit the city's budget webpage. It has a lot of information here if you have questions as we are working through the budget for 24. So moving on to the fun stuff. This chart, you may remember, this was a chart that we went through at the last budget work session for the 23 budget. It was on April 7th. It had 3 columns at that time. One was a column that for items that we were adding to the 23 budget. One was things that we're going to add to the CIP, and then one was a projected surplus for 22 and how we might use that. At the time, again, this was on April 7th, we were projecting a revenue budget surplus of about $12 million. Council went through a list of things to include, and the list on this slide are the things that we talked about at that time that you may want to use the surplus for. In particular, you may note that the biggest allocation was for the school reconfiguration project. We added some cash to get us to the 68.8. We also added, if you recall, some of those debt scenarios. We added 3 years of increase for the debt service to help offset that. And then in addition, we added a few other things, including a reserve for the SAFER grant, which we've been talking about, some things for CAT. But again, all the things on this list will be subject to discussion, and council would have an opportunity to formally approve these when our finance director, Mr. Cullinan, presents this to you in December. Councilor McGill, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, it says the Meadow Creek Trail section, 700,000, but I thought we also recently appropriated ARPA money for the Meadow Creek Trail. So I just want to make sure if this is an addition to that.
Yeah, so Sam, can you speak to that?
You're still muted, Sam.
Oops, I'm sorry. I was just talking. Yes, the 700,000 is in addition to the 500,000 that was recently approved. That makes it a fully funded project.
Reiterate, so again, none of this is written in stone yet. These were just things that you all talked about as allocations. Again, there would have to be a formal appropriation and vote in December with the year-end appropriation on that, once the year-end is closed and the surplus is finalized.
Just to follow up on that last matter, Mr. Sanders, do we have any idea when, assuming the $700,000 is in fact appropriated in December, when that trail might be built?
Yeah, we actually have a meeting scheduled for this Thursday, so I'll be able to give you a very good answer on Friday, but we are moving forward. The goal is to have the trail constructed next year.
Great.
Entirely.
Great. I know the folks over there have been waiting a long time and be happy for it. And if it could be done before the beginning of the next school year, that might be helpful, because we are hoping that this trail will be used by kids walking from Mickey Drive to Greenbrier School. Thank you.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, moving right along. As you know, we've been talking, it's October, but we've had several issues that have come up, budgetary issues that we've been able to address so far using one-time dollars that will now become part of our base budget. And those things are on this list. For example, we've added a few positions to the fire department. We added more funding to facilities repair and the equipment replacement fund that were cut due to savings that we needed because of COVID. We've added some staffing to human resources and human rights department. We increased pay for bus drivers, as you know. And so I have the facilities repair and the equipment replacement numbers in red, because those are funding amounts that are at our discretion. They don't necessarily have to be written in stone. The other dollars are in black because they are staffing related expenditures that are more or less written in stone at this point. The SAFER grant, as you saw, it was on the previous list. We know that once that comes 100% online, the cost of that is a little over $2 million that we'll need to absorb in the budget. In 24, we picked that up in March, or towards the end of March. So there are about 3 months that we have to pay for in 24 that will become part of the base budget in 24. So all of these together total about $3.5 million that the expenditure budget will be increased as we start this process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're seeing now. And in your packet for later tonight, you have the monthly quarterly report. And I want to be clear that on the right-hand side of the screen, this is the projection for FY23 revenue. We are still seeing strong performance with sales and transient, lodging tax, and meals tax. As you know, you voted to do away with the vehicle license fee. Interest is performing well right now. And so all this to say, at this point, as of September 30th, we are currently projecting that our revenues will come in above our current budget at about $4 million. That represents just under 2% of our total budget for the general fund. So all that's strong. We anticipate moving into 24 that's a very good indicator of what the 24 budget will look like. As you recall, we had from 22 to 23, we were very fortunate to have a great or sizable revenue increase, both from COVID recovery as well as real estate assessments that were high. In general, our average growth from year to year is usually somewhere in the 2 to 4%. And if there is such a thing as normal, that's sort of what we are looking at for 24. We do anticipate a growth rate that is somewhere in this 2 to 4% range, which would put us roughly at $4 to $8 million of new revenue. There are a lot of unknowns at this point, and this is really early projection as we're only in the first quarter. There are the looming conversations about inflation. If you read a lot of the listserv things from a lot of the financial groups, you'll read that people are talking about being cautious, thinking about reserves. It's unknown at this point how meals, sales, and lodging whether they will continue to perform strongly or whether we'll begin to see some impact as things with the national economy change. In addition, real estate tax, at this point with the unknown of the interest rates, although they are continuing to climb, it is still kind of anybody's guess what the impact on that may be in terms of real estate values come January. So we are watching all of these very closely. The revenue team continues to meet monthly. And again, right now, based on what we know for 24, as of this moment, we're looking about $4 million of additional revenue for 24. Did I hear a question somewhere? Okay. Want to move on to a few other items that we'd like to get council's thinking about and perhaps get some input. One of those being the Vibrant Community Funds. As you know, over the last few years, we have typically budgeted about $2.5 million in the general fund for Vibrant Community funding. That is not reflective of the applications or requests that we have received. In last year, we received a funding request for about $4.3 million. And so what happens is once those requests and applications are received, the scoring happens, and then we basically adjust our funding percent based on the available funding. So at this point, the question or consideration for council is to get some feedback from you as to where you are. Are you comfortable with leaving that approximately the same amount of funding? Are you interested in trying to increase that? During this year, as you know, we have allocated some one-time funding with our ARP funds. We've allocated $1 million for agency investments, $1.6 million for housing and homelessness, and about $580,000 for community arts and festivals that are in addition to the normal Vibrant Community funding process. The applications have been, the process has been opened up. The applications are due in November. And we can come back to you at that point and give you an insight as to what the requests are in terms of total dollars. But again, would like some feedback on where you'd like to land in terms of total funding.
So just for clarification, as I said, 2.5 there for housing, that's, I mean, we give funding to housing in a lot of other different ways, so it's much more than that is 2.5 from this particular fund. I know that just generally speaking, now back just kind of about the Vibrant Community Funds, is that this is, you know, one of those areas that, you know, we could have more discussion over $5,000 to $10,000 over we made for something that may be given $20 or $30 million, because these programs are something that really impact the community because of the people that work there, the people that they serve. So it seemed to be a lot more publicity for these programs, and I know that a lot of these, you know, I work with as far as you know individuals that work there, and throughout the year for new ones, I know I've been referring them to Misty and her program to make sure that they apply if they have questions. And as far as if the 4.3 million, I'm glad we did, by the way, pull out some programs to that they don't have to go through the same type of process for us to review. I think that was a good idea. I mean, right now, I think that funding seems appropriate, but I just haven't really had much time to really review and digest from last year. It's hard to believe it's time already to start thinking about. But I'm just kind of babbling at this point. But you know, so
It's all good. I know that the way it's been restructured is that housing programs that were done as part of Vibrant Community are part of through the CAF application process now. I believe I'm right about that.
Yep, we have a slide on that too.
Okay,
and
great.
thank you for bringing that up, because
Okay.
we are going to touch on that.
I'm stealing your thunder.
No, please go ahead.
And the ARP one-time funding, we have more funding available to us if we chose to use that, correct?
There is an unallocated amount. I don't recall the balance right off the top of my head, but there is some portion that is unallocated. That's
I think
correct.
Okay.
if we approve some allocations later on tonight, it will be down to about 1.6 million.
Got it, okay.
Hey there.
Beach is definitely who we need.
Chrissy, has there ever been some sort of, I guess, cost of living adjustment over the years so that we are increasing the amount into the Vibrant Community Funds versus expecting the same amount of service for the same amount of money over years?
I think it's fair to, I have not actually, there's not a formal policy about that I'm aware of. I think if we went back and looked, the amount has probably increased slightly. But in a concerted manner, I would say probably not. And so, we've always tried to stay within sort of this range. But I don't know that was in necessarily any specific direction that was given. It was just, that was what was in the budget. And so we just worked with that.
I think this is something that's kind of a holistic thing of, if we are expecting someone to provide the same services for the amount of money they're asking for as they asked for 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we're not factoring in basically change in economy into what we are putting in towards our nonprofits that we're saying we want to support.
Well, and that's kind of a good lead-in, actually, to our next slide that we wanted to sort of highlight is the Pathways Fund. Specifically, as you talk about economic conditions, right now, the Pathways Fund has been in the budget at a flat amount for quite some time at just a little over $84,000. I know that in FY22, using ARP and CARES money, we distributed just over $1.5 million. For the first quarter of 23, we've already distributed $426,000. And so if we annualize that at the same rate, we're looking at about $1.2 million. So again, that's a big jump. And all of that is with one-time money. That's another question for council that we'd like some weigh in as to, obviously that's not sustainable unless we are able to add more funding as part of the budget process.
Yeah, I would appreciate a little more background on what the Pathways program is.
I think Ms. Graves is on. Misty, do you want to speak to that a little bit? Or maybe she's not.
I don't see, but I mean, in
Ms.
from my
Marshall, do you want to speak to it?
Yes, Ashley.
Oh, there she is.
Here I am. Hi.
Sorry.
I was in the participant area. Someone had to rescue me and move me over. Pathway is the funding that goes to support the community resource hotline. So right now, the Pathways programs assist residents with rental assistance and utility bill assistance. So if they have back rent or mortgage that they owe and they meet the ARPA guidelines or definitions for impacted community members, then they're eligible for the funding. Currently, we have a monthly limit of $3,000 per city resident. We have an annual allotment of $3,000 per city resident. We made that adjustment up from $1,000 because rents are high. And if someone owes rents, they're likely going to owe a little bit more than $1,000. That is why you see such a big jump. We made that change on July 1. And that's why you see a big jump in what we distributed overall in the fiscal year 22 to what we've already spent in the first quarter of FY23. But to answer your question, it's the hotline that folks call to get assistance with rental assistance, mortgage assistance, or utility bill assistance. The impact right now is that there's a lot of utility bill cutoffs, and that's another reason why we see just increase in expending on that.
Thank you. I just wonder why it says $84,516 budget versus an allocation. I don't understand the slide. I'm sorry. I understand
That's okay. That's my
what
fault.
Pathways is for now, but
Yeah, so the 84,516 is what has been in the city budget. That is, if you went to the city budget book and you looked up Pathways Fund or Emergency Assistance Fund, that's what you're going to see is in the budget. What we have allocated, the difference between the 1.5 million for 22 and the 84,000 has all been allocated using one-time ARP or CARES money.
I see.
Same for 23. Anything over the 84,000 is one-time money.
I see. Thank you.
And the 84,000 has been the figure for FY20, FY21, FY20. That's one that has been fairly constant. We have added to it from various other sources. For example, one of the first things we did in January of 2020 was to add from the surplus from fiscal year 2019, we added $300,000 to that fund at that point.
Was that one time or?
It was a one-time, but then we had another one-time expenditure out of, I guess, CARES Act funds, and then another one-time expenditure out of ARP funds or something like that,
That's correct.
so.
So I guess the point of this is at some point we're going to have to think beyond these grants that we're getting and what we really want to fund this going forward, what sort of level of support we want to put in.
Yep.
Well, and 84,000 has been shown even pre-COVID wasn't enough,
Yeah.
even remotely enough. And it hasn't, and it's been funded at the end of the year for surplus more than I think even this council's sitting. And that we might want to look at a little bit more realistic number.
Did you
If-
have some? I'm
If
sorry.
we've tripled, if the allotment has tripled for the year, then at base, we should be tripling this budget.
And I think part of what, and I agree, it needs to be higher, probably higher by some substantial amount, at least compared to the existing need. But I'd be very curious to see just historical data on the drawdown rates and the gap between what's been requested and what was available. Because even in this fiscal year's allocation, I know that there's some concerns even that this current allocation won't be sufficient. And just anecdotally, I probably have about 1 or 2 people a week who reach out to me who are facing eviction, and this is currently the only resource that exists at a local, state, or federal level to provide them any assistance. So we're obviously still dealing with the rise in evictions post the pandemic protections and state and federal financial assistance programs having ended. So it'll just be very critical to fund. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at, people who become homeless as a result.
So I heard Cena say tripling. So are we considering like 250?
Well, I guess it would depend on what we think in terms of access to further grants are. If there's no access going forward to those additional funds, then maybe we make it 500,000.
And you don't have to decide tonight. I think we were just, trying to get some input from council. I think we know now we need to look at some increases, and we can certainly do the research on that and figure out what that might look like going forward. But I think we hear you that we want to make a substantial increase in this funding.
Okay, thank
Is
you.
that fair?
I think so.
Yeah.
Should we move on, or do you
Sure.
guys want to
I
talk
think
about
so,
this more?
yeah.
Okay. As you noted on earlier, we are pulling the housing fund request out of the VCF process, or Vibrant Community Funding process. They will be going as part of the CAF process. A notice of funding available was put out publicly, so we will be requesting proposals at some point soon in the future. And there are now 4 different pots of money for housing initiatives. This is part of a deliverable and a redesign from the HRNA report that you received late last year.
Could you go back for 1 second, please? And so this does not include specific projects that we want to do as part of the CIP. I guess that's the second row.
The projects of the, so there would be 2 things, specific projects such as Friendship Court, CRHA initiatives. Those things are separate line items in the CIP.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you have specific project in mind. Mr. Sanders might be able to address that, but those are not part of this process.
So what I'll offer, Councilor Pinkston and others, is that the second item is meant to capture where there is a development project that anyone in the public sphere would like the city to be aware of for consideration. This would be where new requests towards investments from the CIP, as well as support letters for low-income housing tax credit applications, or anything else like a loan, a grant, or what have you that is not within one of these three opportunities. We're giving all of the developers a predictable opportunity each year for them to be able to apply for consideration. There is no money funded in this pot. As you see, it says to be determined, and that will be to make it possible for us to receive a request and then bring those forward as they come in.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. And the other 3 rows you say reflect the report by HRA?
All of this entire approach to putting out a notice of funding availability is really one of the recommendations from HRNA, so that we as a city government making resources available would actually provide some level of predictability to the nonprofits and developers out there that want to do work with us as a city. This gives them the ability to put on their schedules, because each one of these has a defined RFP period that staff is now working to. And there will be a release of an individual RFP giving them a period of time to respond. And then we will, of course, review and come back with recommendations for council to consider.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this slide?
Nope.
Okay, so moving on, we have a large list of anticipated drivers for the FY24 budget. All of them in and of themselves are significant dollar amounts that we will be discussing and having to make some decisions on. We've been talking about collective bargaining and COLAs. COLA here being for those who may not be part of a bargaining unit, what those may look like. The compensation study, which is due hopefully by the end of this year. I will tell you that we are seeing significant CIP submissions were due on the 7th. And just as a quick glance, we're looking through those and reviewing those now, but we are seeing significant inflationary increase in construction cost. That will impact our CIP. We have schools, as you recall, last year during our budget discussions, their thermometer, that they're bringing down the temperature on their use of one-time funding, as well as what impacts collective bargaining may have on their operating budgets. We have the climate action plan. We also have transportation issues, both for the discussions and future of CAT, but also city infrastructure as it relates to sidewalks and roads and lighting infrastructure. And then in addition, as you recall, with our discussions with the CIP last year and the addition of the school project, we had year 5 of our CIP that we basically had not allocated any projects to. So all of that are things that we will be talking with council about and having to make decisions on and figuring out what gets the priority and how we can fit this in. So it will be a fun, exciting budget development process for sure. And I'm sorry.
A quick question. I've heard on some projects, maybe this is more worst case scenario, but construction costs for a local development in some cases have gone up like 30+%. Is that the significance of the kind of cost increase you're seeing with those requests?
I didn't look at it in terms of percent, but I will tell you overall, in comparing the 5-year plan that was adopted in 23 versus the requests that are unvetted at this point, but in fairness, that are unvetted, we're looking at a double-digit millions of dollars. So, and more than 10, I will tell you that. And that's just with the existing projects we know about. So it is significant. We'll be talking about increases on the school project, as well as some of the bigger things that were in the CIP as well.
Yeah, and that would match, because I've even just heard in the private sector, I mean, it's pretty brutal and kind of at a scale that's like kind of budget changing for us.
Yes. Yes.
I confess I've missed that word thermometer of one-time funding.
So if
been
you
a
recall,
while.
Ms. Powell made a presentation, when she made her presentation to the school board and also to council last year. She had a thermometer where she talked about their use of one-time funding to balance their operating budget and how they were hot on one-time funding and they were bringing that down to cool that off to
Yeah.
eventually get away from that. If you recall, during COVID from 21 to 22, the city level funded the school's contribution because they had CARES money and they were able to use those dollars. And so even though we level funded them, their budget still went up and they used that increase, they used one-time money for that. And then from 22 to 23, we made up some of that, but they also were able to use some additional one-time money, a lot less than before. And so we've been gradually trying to buy that down so that the local contribution is now back, at some point needs to get back to a level because the one-time money is going to run out. And so it was just something that she used to kind of as a visual to help talk about that. And so that's the thermometer.
Yeah, I remember that, and thank you. I just forgot we were still going to have to deal with that thermometer. So
If it followed me from school board to council, but
yeah,
it was
it's
very
contagious.
visual.
Yeah, it's a fever or something. Yeah, and I'll be interested to get some sort of update at some point about Buford, the budget for that. So I think that Mr. Sanders is going to try to get us an update in our 221s. Get us an update at some point.
And one other question. So in terms of the timeline for the compensation study, what's the timeline of when we would expect basically to be completed and kind of have the report that has the recommendations of the changes that are needed?
We're still on track to complete it at the end of the year. I would suspect that we will get after we get the comparatives that are going out this week to other jurisdictions, that Gallagher will have something in our hands early December for us to begin to review, and it'll probably be January before we are able to roll something out to council and tell you what we think the implications of the study are.
Yeah, because past couple of budget cycles, if I remember, it was a very ballpark number, but it was estimated that could easily be like a $10 million expenditure for the city if you were to fully do what it's likely to recommend.
I would be surprised if it's that high. That would be extraordinary and would really put us at a tough spot. But it's going to be much more than we would normally pay and spend in compensation. So it's going to be
Yeah.
an increase.
Yeah, maybe I missed. Maybe that was like all our recurring expenditures that weren't baked into our budget or something. But
Yeah.
either way,
Yeah, I looked at a compensation study for a comparable city, and the number I saw was about $6 million for that community that is pretty comparable to us. So that's how I've been, plus or minus somewhere around that.
right? Okay.
Yep, so I just popped back to this slide because I don't want to overdo it on the negative Nilly, but I do just want to add some perspective that, if we are close to what we are projecting our growth to be, again, I just want to reiterate, we're thinking we're somewhere in the 2 to 4% range, which would give us $4 to $8 million. And, from the previous slide, we know that 3.2, we've give or take, depending on what we decided with facilities repair, equipment replacement, we've already added some and accounted for some of that. And so all this to say is there are a lot of decisions and a lot of conversations that we need to have. And, we need to talk about what council's priorities are in terms of, how you want us to address these items. And that's really all we have for this presentation. Happy to answer any questions or take any other feedback that you'd like to share.
I'd just like to say that, to put things in perspective, for the 22 budget cycle, because of the real estate assessment increases, we were fortunate to have really about $14 million of spending that we could allocate. And council did some great work in making investments in the organization and in the community and on some very key projects. The estimate is not just being conservative, but what we see now is going to be 4 to 5 million. So that means that with the list of other challenges that we have that we're going to have to find some way to fund, this next budget will be much tighter, and the decisions that council will have to make will be much harder. And just to level set that and get us ready for that process.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. So I just had got a couple of comments and then a question. One is that, I know that I will have more questions as we move forward, but for now, I just would like to have the flexibility in the budget to be able to address things that might come up during the year, like us adding the bathrooms to the downtown mall, that expenditure, things. So I know that we always have those flexibility in the budget, but I still think that things like that is important. Things that come up we just can't account for that we want to be able to address. I think people would expect us to as a city. I think that as inflation increases and housing prices increases, we want to be able to have, the flexibility or the funding in programs like the pathway funding to a program to be able to address citizens that come to us in need. And I know we won't be able to serve them all, but if we're able to set aside at the beginning of the year, said we've allocated that, and even if it's something where for each month they set aside an amount, so it'd be something for the whole year, then maybe that's an approach. And I think my last kind of question maybe to Christy and Chris is like, what at this point, anything about the budget that could potentially keep you up at night as we are beginning the planning process?
I think this budget season is like any other budget season, just like for any other city. There are always way more needs than we have funding. And I think that it's important that, we're able to keep communication lines open, that council is able to keep us informed of what your priorities are and where you would like your focus areas to be, understanding that, we either do a whole lot of stuff a little bit or we do a few things really well. Pick your poison, which one would you like? To have that direction from council is helpful as we go through the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a couple. Did you have something? Yeah. Couple of points. Thank you, as always, for this really excellent presentation. I'm always intrigued that the advertisement for the real estate tax is in early middle of February, we don't have our budget worked out until March or April. I know last time that caused us to really advertise a large number, like 10 cent, which I think we went with 1 cent. I don't know, I guess, those dates are set by law, I'm sure, and there are reasons for all of that, but it does make things awkward to have to kind of hedge, I suppose is the word I'm looking for, or what we think we may need for extra funding from the real estate tax. Hopefully we won't have to raise it again, but I think we need to be thoughtful about the fact that that's a possibility. And so I'm only just putting that out there because I just, from my perspective at least, I want us to go into this knowing that it's possible we may have to raise real estate tax. I hope not. The other piece I'll say about that is, and I think you're getting at this, Mr. Rogers, do we have any sense of how assessments are tracking versus, or what I'm looking at actually is the percent increase in assessments? I think last year it was like 15% or some crazy number. Do we have any sense from Mr. Divers not Mr. Divers, could be someone else, but.
And Mr. Davis, the assessor, my sense is that the certain thing is it will not be at the level it was last year. Okay. And whether it would be 50% or 25%, we don't yet know, but it's going to be lower. Okay. And that plays into the estimate of a $4 million
Sure.
New revenue, which would include the assessment. It's going to be low. Right. If you recall last year, our approach in the end, having advertised a 10 cents tax increase after discussion with council and with the school reconfiguration discussion still very much to the forefront. We advertised 10 cents, and then we gave you a budget that did not allocate the revenue from that. And I would anticipate as we move forward this year, should council, whatever the number is, we're going to try to balance the budget with the revenue that we know.
Right.
And then council will have some choices to make.
Right. Thank you for that. I just want to, at least for my part of all this, when we get to January and, without complete information, which I know we'll still be in the middle of things, I don't want to get boxed in to say, oh, we're not going to raise, maybe we won't raise real estate taxes. I'm not saying we will one way or another. I certainly hope we don't have to, but I also don't want to get boxed in and say, oh, we can't do anything because we never advertised. So maybe I've beat that horse enough. Sorry. Yeah, I would be interested, I guess, just as soon as the school board has information for us, and that's one of our largest expenditures. So both in terms of that large capital project and their operations, I don't recall the actual cadence of when that is supposed to come to us, but I would hope sooner the better. And it doesn't have to be completely set in stone, but I would certainly appreciate that from the school board. Yeah, and then, for me, the thing I'll be looking for mostly in this next budget, last year for me, the focus was on that large school project. This year, the focus for me is going to be on staffing. We did a lot of that last year too, but I really think that the organizational capacity of this organization is getting better, but we need to continue to invest in filling those positions and realizing that this is a hard place to live, it's an expensive place to live. So that's really going to be at high on my list.
Yeah, and to answer your question about the school project, we will be having a work session with the Planning Commission mid-November, and then the public hearing late November on the CIP. So you'll have pretty firmed up numbers on that school project by the end of November.
Okay, thank you.
And then I guess we have a meeting with the school board in February before the budget is actually coming from the city manager.
Yes.
At which we meet with the school board, and the school board, I mean, we basically start the process of hashing out a final request from them.
Yeah, I just think the earlier we get information, and if there's like really large philosophical questions, like when I started this past year, I was surprised at the amount of sort of hesitancy about that large project. If there are things that are sort of out there that aren't really being discussed, that you think, hey, we really need to, this could be a barrier or a snafu or whatever later on, and you feel like, it'd be good for us to start talking with people on the school board, and maybe I should just do that now, call them up. I think the earlier the better, so enough said.
Okay.
I guess a few thoughts is, one, this context is why I was, kind of riding so hard on some of our previous ARPA allocations and decision on eliminating one of our taxes. Because that means some of this stuff on this list, as a result of those decisions, realistically just won't get funded. That is what it is, but the point is we've still got a little bit of ARPA money left unallocated. We have some that's allocated sort of broad buckets. I think we just need to be really strategic in allocating the rest of that money, just recognizing this budget cycle, there's going to be a list of 20 things that are all very important and legitimate, but how are we going to prioritize what makes it to the top this budget cycle? To me, that seems like it's just going to be the biggest challenge, is how do we think through what do we prioritize. To me, some of the top things is I do think it's critical that we maintain our commitment to the affordable housing projects that we've already invested significantly in and that are already underway. I think there would be some pretty enormous consequences if we're not able to fund those projects anymore and they basically just have to stop halfway. Likewise, I would agree with Councilor Pinkston. I think the investments in staff capacity are going to be a big priority that I'm thinking about, particularly when it comes to climate and some of the infrastructure projects we've already invested in that we know we don't really have the staff capacity to implement. Along with that, figuring out how we're going to fund the compensation study, which is going to be critical to ensuring that, even if we put out a job, description and accept applications, if our pay is not competitive, no one will apply. Yeah, I guess those are some of my initial thoughts. Smaller things, I would agree, it sounds like it's already in there, but I think some level of discretion that council is able to have over vibrant community funds and just unexpected expenses that come up through the year are going to be really important. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just already thinking through, we know we've got some big important, expenditures we've discussed that aren't even in this list when it comes to housing, land acquisition, other things. I'm very concerned with how we choose to spend the ARPA money that we haven't so far and what the implications of that will be. But at this point, I guess those are the only thoughts I have.
Okay, the only thought that I would add at this point is that I've been telling folks for the last 6 months that this coming budget is going to be dominated more than anything else by attention to staff salaries and personnel issues, and if that means what we need to do to rebuild the staff and to hire the 70 positions that we are now down. We're advertising 70 positions. that it's not going to happen with less money. The question is how much more money. And I don't think that that's really I mean, if we end up saving money out of it, it's only going to be because we haven't been able to hire the people that we need. And I don't want to be saving money for that reason.
Right.
So, I don't know. Let's see how the wage and comp study comes in December, and what changes we have to make from there.
Right.
Sina?
Sina, got any comments for us?
I mean, I think they've pretty much been echoed here. Just the class and comp study, we know I've been pretty vocal about wanting to make sure we're supporting our staff and getting our staff up to a correct, serviceable wage. I'm willing to raise taxes on this. Let's see, affordable housing, we're not going to get the deeply affordable housing unless we are making an investment with public funds. It's just, so these are areas that we need to be. And we also know with the construction increases that we know the school project is going to that's going to affect the schools project, which we have made a pretty significant commitment to. And therefore, how are we going to manage that increase? And as I said last year, I don't think we're going to be able to make those increases without some significant tax increases.
Any other comments, council?
I'm good.
Mr. City Manager, anything else you want out of us?
No, this has been very, very helpful. And as we move forward in the coming weeks, we will pay attention to what you've said here and try to bring back a budget that we can all be happy with, like we were at the end of last year. And it's going to take some work to get there.
Okay. Well, I guess that wraps up our only item on the agenda for 4 o'clock. The next time we would come back here would be at 6:30 for the general public session. However, in the meantime, we have some closed session business to attend to. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Sure. I'll make that motion. Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene within a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711, A1 and A8, for discussion or consideration of the current contract for city management services by the Robert Bob Group, for consideration of the appointment of a permanent city manager, and for consultation with legal counsel regarding those matters.
Is there a second to this motion?
Second?
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. City Council will now go into closed session and will return to a separate Zoom link for the open meeting at 6:30. Thank you all. We'll see you then.